So this is our Evolution MX main screen. The invoice register is available to you now to modernize the whole process that many of us face as a bit of an administrative nightmare. Mostly nowadays, I'm sure you'll agree, you're receiving most of your invoices via email. So rather than expect you to have to do anything with that email in terms of turning it into a physical copy, which I'm sure a lot of you are having to do, print off the email and then you're having to deal with the paperwork and then you're posting the entry and then you are having to file or deal with the paperwork on completion, whether you're filing it or shredding it. So what we're doing with Invoice Register is we're keeping all of that digital. No need to print anything, no need to scan anything, no barcodes for those of you that were familiar with the previous method within Evolution MX of dealing with the digitization of copies. We're keeping it electronic. And the Invoice Register exists for both the suppliers, the purchase ledger, and also the subcontractors in terms of invoices. It's up to you whether you would use the same invoice email address for both or whether there would be a separate email address. The invoice register works by feeding off a nominated email address. So typically it would be invoices@yourcompany.com. Okay, and it's up to you, as I say, whether that is a different email address for the purchase ledger for the subcontractors. If it's the same one, then the only implication you've got there is you'll be asked every time you post an invoice, is this a supplier or is it a subby? Because it's not going to know otherwise. If it is dedicated to PL invoices or SC invoices, then it's going to know which ledger it is immediately. So without further ado, let's have a look at our invoice register. So within the purchase ledger, I've got a menu-driven system which would allow me to go to a list of those invoices that have been received under email and ready to be processed. Or I can make use of the dashboard. Now, dashboards are a part of the analytics function of Evolution MX. Some of you may be familiar with this. It's optional as to whether you would use them and also how you would use them in terms of what they would look like. So this is an example of an invoicing dashboard, which is summarizing and telling me at a glance how many things I've got to do. So I've got 5 things to process in the orange tile. What that means is that 5 separate attachments have been received under that monitored email address. They may have been from 5 separate emails. They may be from all the same email. It's just a number of attachments that it's recognizing. Before we go any further, it's worth pointing out that the invoice register is available on 2 levels. We've got what we call entry level, which is whereby the image will be presented on screen for you, but you're still expected to do all of the input. The top up to that could be something we refer to as OCR, optical character recognition, where the system can read the information and make suggested postings to you. Now, primarily, I'm going to concentrate on the entry level, but I will introduce the idea of the OCR to you, should that be of any interest. So within the invoice register, I've got my orange tile summarizing what's to be processed. If I click on that orange tile, or if I go to the unprocessed menu item on the left, I'll be able to see exactly what's been received underneath that email address. Okay, with a summary of where it's come from and an indication of when it was received. You can click into any of those to be able to see a preview of what that image contains. And as I say, the individual attachments have been recognized as individual entries on this list. So I've got 3 examples here, all came from Wolseley. They were actually all on the same email, but they've been separated out as separate potential postings. Now, as I say, it works best if what is received under this email address is for the purchase ledger, say, and it's primarily, if not exclusively, invoices. Not the end of the world if other things slip through, such as I've got here a statement, because you can just basically tick those off the list without requiring any further processing. I'll just access that particular item, and at the top there, I've got the option to say it's invalid. Before I do so, what you can do without having to return to the emails is you can use the email button and you could forward that to your accounts at or purchase ledger, or whatever it might be, the proper place that item should be. I'll just mark it as invalid, so it's going to remove it from the list. It'll then do a recalculation for me to tell me now I've got less things to do than I had. So that count will be reset in a moment to 4 items. Other things that will happen from a housekeeping point of view, you'll likely, I'm sure, get an attachment that's actually made up of more than one invoice. I've got an example here. Item number 42 is going to be previewed as the first page of the document. If I click into it, okay, that one is actually, no, that is a single page one. I beg your pardon. It's the one before that. That's the multi-page one. So if I click on that one, that's going to be saying here we've got 4 pages as part of that same attachment. Now the system doesn't know that that may be 4 separate invoices because it might be a 4-page single invoice. You've got the option here of being able to carve it up into the separate pages that allow you to then process it. Just by sitting on page 1 and hitting save at the top, the system will give you the option to split. Now you can either do this prior to the posting or during the posting. You can just split off as you make the postings. So if I say yes to split, that's going to retain the remaining 3 pages as the same entry, but it's going to create a new entry for that single first page. So I can repeat the process as much as I want to by saving and splitting into multiple different chunks that I can now deal with separately. Okay, and that's now going to put my list of things to do up to 6 items. Now, emails received directly will appear on here automatically. If you still receive something to your accounts at email or your personal email, you can just forward them on to the invoices at email address, whatever that may be. You've also got the option of being able to drag and drop into here. So if you have got something that's been received and is sitting on your desktop or somewhere else in the system, then you have the option of being able to go and drag it from wherever it is and just pop it into the invoice register, bypassing the need for it necessarily to come in through the email. Okay, so let's process an invoice or two through the invoice register. Let's take that first example we had here. Now, this is a straightforward enough invoice that's not linked to any prior purchase ordering. So we'll tackle that one first and allow us to process it all the way through. So click onto it to see a preview of it on the left-hand side. You can clearly navigate around the screen to see a full copy of all the detail associated with that invoice. And then we're going to use the right-hand panel to make the posting. You'll notice here it's automatically recognized it's a supplier rather than a subcontractor because I'm feeding off a dedicated email address. It's not a credit note, so I don't need to tick the box. The supplier, then I can either browse for the supplier, finding those that are sitting within your purchase ledger, or you can just start typing. By typing, it automatically narrows down the suggestions to you based upon more information that you give to it. The invoice date will always be assumed to be today, which of course it never is going to be. So you can use the calendar to make an alternative selection. Next to that, you've got the option of being able to confirm or alter the period. Now, under normal circumstances, the calendar will be set up to automatically recognize where you are. So it would be telling me that was period 10 in the year ending 2025, assuming a December end of year, of course. It means, though, quite conveniently, that you can be in a situation whereby you are posting invoices for 2 different months at the same time. So that allows us to say, right, this is period 10. If I was to move into getting a November invoice, then I could say that's period 11 without having to come out of the routine and then re-enter it as you would have to do with some of the legacy systems. So I'm just going to confirm that my calendar is just not set up to accurately recognize the date, but as I say, that in normal circumstances, that would be the case. The due date is going to be worked out and presented to you as a suggestion based upon the terms that are offered by that particular supplier, and you can override that either now or later. For the ref 1, I don't need to put anything in there. I'll let the system automatically allocate the next number, just as it keeps an up-to-date audit for that. For those of you having used previously Evolution M, obviously that's the barcode, or has been. There's no need for a barcode with any of this processing. So we're just going to let the system automatically allocate that. But ref 2 I can use to put in the supplier's invoice number. And then I'll also go and put in the gross value, including VAT. The system will do an assumptive calculation for you based upon the default VAT that you've set for that particular supplier. If that is different, maybe because of rounding, pennies differences and that so forth, then you can override the figures that have been suggested to you in blue. You've also got the option of going into the VAT analysis, should there be a requirement to split that and say it's not all actually at standard rate, some of it's at 0 rate, for example. Okay, on this occasion, I'm going to bypass the order number and I'm going to go into the show cost allocation, which is going to allow me to tell the system where do I put the costs for that 300 net value on this invoice, equivalent to doing the analysis button within the old Evolution M that some of you will be familiar with. Okay, so the show cost allocation will actually open up an empty window, allowing me to say to the system what I'm going to do with that £300. I've got the add option here, which will allow me to browse on contracts, say, where I can call it up and see my live contract list, click on that, and then confirm the cost head that's going to be relevant to that. That will default again to the norm that's been set by you in the terms for the supplier, but you've got access there to any of the cost heads that you've got open within the system. And of course, the nominal ledger, and on this occasion, is going to be found by virtue of the contract and the cost head that you're selecting. So I'll just accept that value for the cost head for that particular line. I'm going to reduce the value though, just to show you how you've got the option of being able to put in lines that aren't necessarily for a contract. Of course, you could put on a second line for a different contract, or for the same contract, different cost head. But what you've also got is the ability to put in just a nominal code. So this allows you to browse on your nominal ledger chart of accounts to pick up what could be an overhead or an expense. It's not going to be necessarily affecting your contract ledger. So if I just put in an advertising charge at that point. Now, this bottom half of the screen has been designed for a user who's typically going to be involved with purchase orders. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily the screen that you have to see. So you've got the ability as an individual user to choose what that layout of the bottom screen looks like. I've got here a plus icon, which will allow me to tick off the columns that I don't necessarily want to see. Okay, if you're never involved with purchase orders, then it would make sense to remove the purchase orders, for example. But even so, you've got the ability to be able to rejig the layout of those items at the bottom. So if you'd like the notes, for example, to be more prevalent, then you can bring that over. You can maybe shrink it down. So you're actually tailoring the screen to look the way that you're happiest with it. You could then save that so that next time it's going to remember what you did. But you could also have different people who have got different ways of looking at that same analysis. So it's not a one rule fits all necessarily. So that can be quite handy to make it more comfortable and convenient for somebody to use on a personal level. I'll just accept that second line, and I've now got nothing left to allocate. Okay, I'm just now going to submit that, and that may be the end of the story as far as the posting is concerned. So just by submitting it, it's going to take that all the way through to the ledger, update the contract costs, the nominal ledgers, and obviously the supplier ledger, and it removes it off my list of things to do. Okay, that's a relatively straightforward invoice. Staying with my list of items, if I were to ask for a second item to be involved, let's call on this second item. So this one does involve purchase ordering. So we've seen how it doesn't necessarily have to involve a purchase order, but we'll now use it so as it does. So I'm going to use Wolseley as the same account. I'm just going to confirm the same default details that have been suggested for the dates. I'll put in the reference, and I'll also put in the gross value. Now this time there's going to be a purchase order number. So I can either enter it into the order number field, or I can start to do a browse whereby I can see a list of all of those purchase orders outstanding for this supplier. On the preview of the invoice, you can see just towards the bottom left there's a purchase order number being quoted. So rather than having to wade my way through a list of all of the orders, I can just use the column filters here to say, let's jump to order number 156. It will then find it for you. Click onto it, it then loads the lines of the purchase order so that when I now go to show cost allocation, potentially there will be lines already present. I say potentially because it will depend on how you set the system up in terms of, do you match back to purchase order details, or do you go through a GRN, goods received process prior to that? So the system will be set up to recognize that your norm is going to be matching to deliveries rather than back to purchase orders. Even if you set the norm, it's not going to stop you from doing the odd exception whereby maybe there wasn't a delivery note, but you said normally there is. Now, on this occasion, we are going back to the purchase order. So we are seeing that the purchase order consisted of 6 items at 50, 5 at 12, 1 at 25, meaning that there is going to be a discrepancy. Over here on the far right, we've got a to allocate figure of 15. So it's telling us that there is something still to be done with that particular matching. And it might be that the pricing maybe is different from what the order thought it was. So you can, at this point, I've highlighted here for you in yellow. If you don't see yellow on your screens, it's just a case of us having to get involved in advising you as to how to reformat this. This can just highlight for the operator to make them clear that those are typically the columns that you can make access to. So it may be that you need to maybe change the quantity. Maybe it wasn't 6 it was invoiced, or maybe the price wasn't 50. So you can make a change to it here without affecting the need to go and change the actual purchase order. Although the system will recognize there was a discrepancy. What the order should have been invoiced at was different from what it actually was invoiced at. And we can use the analytics functionality there to report upon any price variances that maybe occurred. Now, on this occasion, it's nothing to do with the inequality of the pricing or the quantity. It is to do with something which most of you are familiar with. It's the inclusion of delivery on the invoice that wasn't taken care of at the point of ordering. So I may now be in a situation where I'm happy to add that to the invoice value, or maybe I need to pause it because I need to get approval from somebody else before that happens. And this is where we can use a function called place on query, which is allowing you to pause the entry of the invoice as it is. So you're not being committed to it. Some systems will say, well, if you don't know the whole story, you're going to have to abandon out and start it all over again later. With this, we're saying we don't have to. You could just save it as it is, and that will save the entries you've done. But placing it on query will do the saving, but also allow you to prompt another user or another person in the organization to get involved with the approval. So I'll put delivery charge question mark, and I'll be able to pass it to another nominated user. Now, this might be a user of your Evolution MX system, but doesn't necessarily have to be, because it can rely purely upon an email being sent to that person. It very much depends on how frequently do you need to bother that person for advice. And it's very much an ad hoc thing. You decide if you want to query an invoice and who it goes to, and then they will pick it up either through use of the system. So that was myself that I sent it to. Maybe a bit unusual, but it could be something you do because it's something you can find out yourself. You just haven't got the time and trouble to do it right now. So here I could go to the approval menu, or the user could go to the approval menu and be presented with a list of those items that have been sent to them using that query mechanism, giving them the ability to say what input is requested of them. So by highlighting the particular item, we can see that the preview of the invoice is being made available to us there. And it could be as straightforward as them saying, right, I'm not going to be putting entry onto the right hand side of the screen. I'm just going to use a little notes field, a sticky note, to say that's okay. Okay, and then I can take it off query. That will then make it available back on the to-do list of the admin. The alternative could be, if I didn't need to go and do the takeoff query at that point, I could just approve it at this point, and it would have then similarly taken the query off. So that will now appear back on the to-do list of the person who sent it to query. If I was worried about how many had been sent to query and I hadn't seen them back yet, I didn't know what was outstanding, then a blue tile here is giving you access purely to the query list. So that would allow you to see exactly what has been placed on query and who they're with. Okay, so you can manage those. You're not going to go losing anything, even though it's maybe disappeared in the email trail somewhere. Now, the alternative to that could be that the person that you've asked for the query is actually going to be prompted via email. So this is typically the sort of thing that they would receive. The Dell charge question mark was the little note I put in onto the note section, and attached to that email will be a copy of that invoice. So they can clearly see what is being queried and how they may be able to provide the missing information for you. And using this mechanism, email only, all they would do is reply to the email, and then because you were the instigator of the query to them, it would come back to your inbox. So nothing to do with invoice register. It's all happening outside of email, meaning that that person doesn't have to be an actual user of the Evolution MX system. Okay, so that's how we can see how the query list has been of use to us. The item has come back to me because it's been taken off query, and that's the crucial thing here with the querying. When somebody deals with the query, it'll always come back to the admin sort of dashboard, if you like, to be dealt with further. So I can now pick that up. I've been told it's okay to do. I can go back to my cost allocation to be able to see the lines that are currently being held against that, and I can see the extra line that I need to put in to balance off that £15. So at the bottom here, I'll just do as I did with the first example. I'll add a line and choose to either contract cost it or treat it as overhead, your choice, for that remaining £15. Okay, at that point then I can submit that and off it'll go to the ledger. Another word on the approvals process could be that instead of, or as well as using that place on query, you maybe want somebody to now approve that before it actually goes to the ledger. And that can be achieved through the use of workflow. So workflow is flexible for you to set up the rules of who receives what under what circumstances. In my case, I've got a Tom, Dick and Harry who have been set up there, maybe because they look after different contracts, or maybe they've got different areas of responsibility. So I'm being selective in being able to say, I'm going to send this off to Tom, for example. Now that can work in the same ways we've just seen with the query, in terms of it either comes to Tom on his approval list, or it goes to him via email. The difference there is that once the approval has been given, it doesn't come back to admin. It just passes through to the ledger potentially, or onto what could be a next level of approval. So the workflow can be quite sophisticated in the way it's set up, where it can go from one person to another. It may be that there's a group of 3 people it gets sent to, where all 3 have to approve it, or maybe only one of the 3 has to. So it can be quite sophisticated in the way it's set up. We can also set it to be triggered automatically by value. So say something over £5 could automatically go into an approval queue. So Tom would then be expected to action that if I put it onto workflow, and he would then access that through the approval menu, or you can nominate somebody to act as proxy for that, for either for permanently or maybe on a period of holiday cover. Now, word on the workflow is if you do choose to use the workflow, it can be set as your preference as to whether that entry will affect the values on the ledger at the point it goes into workflow or only upon completion of the approval. On early releases of the invoice register, it was the latter. It wouldn't go into any ledger updates until the final approval had happened. With the current versions, we're able to have a system setting that says, well, what do you want it to do? Do you want it to actually appear in your ledger so that you can see the value of invoices subject to approval, but they will be completed in the approval process in good time? So that's just something to think about, and we can discuss that with you should you need more information on that. I'm going to just leave the workflow alone on this occasion, and I'm just going to submit that now so that it finishes off the posting and where it goes to the ledger. Okay, that's going to allow me to access those posted details through maybe a traditional account inquiry. So those of you maybe that are familiar with Evolution M could use a traditional ledger inquiry function, which could allow you to fire up the supplier account, move to the transactions, and see that I've got 2 or 3 have been appearing here as new entries on the ledger. So I can double click on any one of them, be able to see the match analysis as to which contracts I posted to it, or access the document, which will be an automatically captured image of the invoice, without the need for anybody to have had to print it, scan it, barcode it, whatever. Okay, and that allows you to see exactly what it is. Even at this point, if you now want to add a note to it, you've got that sticky notes facility available, so you can add text to it. You can even add another document. So if you get a late delivery note or a partial credit or something, then you can add another document alongside the document that's already sitting there. And that would also be available, incidentally, something I should have mentioned while we're doing the posting. During the posting, you can drag and drop another document alongside the invoice so that 2 or more documents get saved with the same posting. So you can access it that way, more up to date, really, or in a more contemporary way. You can access the information through things like the dashboard. So on the purchase ledger, I've got a creditor's dashboard here. Again, we're not going to touch too much on dashboards themselves this time. We have got separate webinars, pre-records really, that have been done on this subject. So if you're interested in those, just let us know. So these can be configured to include whatever you want in terms of highlighted information that you then drill into the detail of. So on here, if I go into my top 10 outstanding creditors bar chart, I'll be able to see my supplier balances. And rather than having to go to the supplier inquiry, I can just open up my Wolseley account, who was sitting there as a top second creditor. I've got the postings that have just been made are being shown now in summary version, and then using the paperclip, I could drill down to the detail to be able to see the image of the document along with any sticky note that may have been entered onto the system previously. Highlight the sticky note, and it will allow you to see who the user was that made that entry and when they made it. And as before, if you want to add a new note or add a new document, you can do so. Okay, so that's our entry-level invoice register. Just to touch on the OCR element for you, we've got OCR available, which could have its own dashboard. Typically, you wouldn't probably have both methods running. It'd be one or the other. And OCR works on the same mechanics in terms of receiving invoices in under a dedicated email address. The difference here could be that you maybe automatically send anything that has arrived at email address away to OCR, just so as it can validate it and work out what it needs to do with it. Or you consciously decide, I'm only going to send them away when I'm ready. And that can depend really on how clean, if you like, the receipts are going to be under that email address. If it's all going to be purely invoices, then that's fine. But the OCR will work on a page count basis, so it'll count what it's been asked to look for, even if it didn't need to look at it. So things like your phone bill, for example, a 20-page phone bill behind a 1-page invoice wouldn't necessarily make sense to send that all the way to OCR. You might want to intercept it and only send away the invoice page. So when OCR has done its work, it'll come back to you and allow you, assuming you want it to verify the input. As you get more relaxed and more comfortable with OCR, you can prevent it from needing to be done each time. It can just accept the details, and if everything matches and everything balances, it can just go off to the ledger. Most people are a little bit nervous about doing that early doors, but that is something you can consider. With this particular example, it's found the information as to who the supplier is by virtue of the VAT number. The supplier is not kind enough to tell you the supplier account number on the invoice, but obviously their VAT number typically will show. That's usually what we'll use as a unique identifier to check against your supplier ledger to work out who the supplier is. But there can be other rules as well. Obviously, some people aren't VAT registered, so maybe it needs to use the postcode or the telephone number or something. So it just needs to be something that it can uniquely help to identify the supplier. And it's found it's PL001. Other fields of interest will be populated by the system based upon a quite an intelligent interaction with it. So it's finding the date here, irrespective of whether the date is in the same format as your system expects. Some ambiguity can appear where there may be multiple dates on the invoice. Maybe there's a due date, a tax point, you know, a delivery date, whatever it might be. So you might need to intercept with it early doors just to get the system conscious of what it does with a particular invoice from, in this case, supplier PL001. And the system will be learning from you as it goes. So if you do need to interact with it, for example, here, the ref2 is picking up the invoice number there. If I say, no, could you use that code instead? Then you can redirect it. And then by clicking on this box just disappearing off the bottom of the screen there, used for training, we're telling the system to observe what you've told it and use that same observation next time. So it gets better and better the more often it receives an invoice from PL001 and the more often you need to interact with it. But typically, there's not an awful lot you need to do for the most part. It can just be finding that information for you on a fairly logical basis. The values, they're probably the biggest time saver for you because it's going to accurately reflect the values that are being presented and make the entry for you. So there's no missing digits or transposition of digits. It's going to accurately record it for you. But again, if you need to tell it to take the VAT from over here, for example, you can do so. Where there's a PO number, then that can be accepted by the system and checked against your outstanding POs, so that if you then go to show cost allocation, I didn't actually need to do that because it's found the matching entries against the PO and there's nothing left to allocate. Just a word there on how that would work. We only match to the purchase order number itself. So if the PO number consisted of multiple lines, the system makes an assumption that all have been covered by the invoice, even if the values didn't match. And then you'd have to unpick the ones which weren't actually valid. It doesn't read it line by line and say, we've had this line, we haven't had that line, we've had the second, third line, or whatever. So just a word on there. But it can be a considerable time saver in terms of getting the values in there. And if most invoices do match to a purchase order 100%, then there is nothing more for you to do. You can then just submit that, away it'll go to the ledger. You've still got the options for using the place on query as we saw before. You've still got the workflow option as well, should you need or want to use that. And you can also control what the ultimate posting is going to be with inside your Evolution MX ledgers. So the status of cleared, for example, as opposed to being on hold, which you could of course do with the non-OCR entries as well. Okay, so that's pretty much it in terms of the invoice register. I will just show you, just because I'm sure some of you will be interested in seeing how the subcontractor side of things would work. Through our subcontractors, I've got a different email address looking at would be different ledger entries. So here I'll be able to look at my subcontractors received invoices, call them up, same idea. We've got the left-hand side is showing you a clear image of the invoice. The right-hand side is inviting you to put the details in there. This one I'd already put in and saved previously, so it's showing me the information, but you've got the same ability to be able to browse on the subcontractor. Notice a little yellow triangle warning there saying, oh, the insurance is expired on that subcontractor, so that's quite useful. The subby order then that needs to be considered for the match, that will open up any subcontractor purchase orders or the order maintenance records that you may have added for your subcontractors, if they are job specific or if they're using a multi-job, maybe you do that. And same as before, the dates and the periods will be recognized. The reference to the value there is going to be the net value. And then if you go into show cost allocation, it will allow you to say where that 300 goes. Now with subcontractors, of course, it's potentially a bit more complex because there are things like retention and discount, and there could be cumulative values, movement values, and so forth. So I've here tried to make it clearer to the user that the highlighted yellow columns are those that could have entry made to them. I've got an indication of what has previously been here on a cumulative invoice, but I could just go into it and say on this occasion, the value is maybe the full 300 quid is against the measured work as opposed to the materials line. Okay, and it's just giving me a warning there to say it's exceeded the budget, or in other words, the order value for measured work on that particular occasion. But I've now got nothing left to allocate there. I can, if those of you have a need to, go into the analysis where you can break that down into the different work categories and cost heads that you need to maybe use there. That's available for you. but we choose to turn that off as a default just to not overcomplicate it. But you've still got the same functionality that we saw elsewhere. Things like the place on query, the workflow, the sticky notes, all of that is observed through the invoice register for subcontractors. And also, of course, would be the OCR side of things as well. Okay, that's just to not leave the subbies out, just to give you an idea as to what that could do for your subcontractors' invoice processing as well. Okay, so that's about it in a nutshell. That's the invoice register, as it can be used either on an entry level for either the suppliers and or the subcontractors, as well as a top-up allowing you to consider the option for OCR.